Welcome back to the Rain Race Podcast. I'm your host, GT Rain, and hoping things all work well here because a couple things going unexpected at the start of this podcast. As always at this point, it seems to. But it's all right because I guess on the sports car racing front, we got some very positive news to discuss this episode, and I'd rather do that than discuss technical issues. I think we got you in a decent frame rate tonight as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit better. I'm maybe moving at like 20 FPS tonight as opposed to my normal 4. So, baby steps. We'll maybe get there one day.
Yeah, we'll take what we get for now. It's better than the 4 or whatever we're working with previous episodes. A lot to discuss, though, today. I gave a little preview teaser at the end of the last show when we were talking to Formula Jonah. I said, listen, you might want to keep your ears peeled for a Ford prototype announcement that's on the radar. Guess what happened the following day? Because this is what happens when we don't do episodes on a Thursday evening. Every single big news piece drops on a Thursday, and then we got to wait a full... And it's always like right after we do an episode as well. It's not the week in between. So we're a little bit late to the ball on this one, but plenty to get to in this show. As always, if you want to ask us any questions during the show, got a chat box. It's a live podcast. We'll try to hit as many of those questions throughout the episode as we can. But I guess starting off with the main topic tonight, let's talk about the Ford LMDh confirmation that we got a couple of weeks ago. And I'll start off by saying there's not very many details about this, are there? We essentially got a very small confirmation at the end of Ford's 2025 season kickoff event, discussing all of their different motorsports programs, saying, yeah, we'll be on the grid at Le Mans in the WEC in 2027. That's it. That's all you're going to get. You're not going to get a manufacturer alignment announcement. You're not going to get any indication on what engine we're going to put in this car right now. Of course, we're not going to tell you anything about any drivers for this car yet, for this program. That's it. But as things go, I think a confirmation that Ford is returning to prototype racing and returning to Le Mans as a factory overall outfit for the first time since really the 1960s. Not really a bad way to start off.
Yeah, I mean, obviously very exciting news. You heard little bits of information thrown around, here and there over the past year and a half that, Ford was considering a program in an LMDh program to return to to get back to the top flight of and more prototype racing. We have Terrace in the chat mentioning the Ford EcoBoost Riley Daytona prototype. It's going to be a far cry from those Daytona prototype days, but really exciting news. Obviously, a huge manufacturer in North America, also around the world. It's really stepping up some of their racing programs in recent years with their association in Formula One. I mean, you alluded to some of the other, or you alluded to when they announced this, there were other program updates that they were talking about as well. But yeah, great to see Ford join the party, and it's getting to be a pretty packed party, I would say. Lots of manufacturers, and interestingly, although it's expected that this won't remain the case, is only a World Endurance Championship mentioned in this announcement.
Yeah, that was the first thing a lot of people picked out of this. I think you were pretty quick to note on the fact that they didn't confirm anything on the IMSA side at first. As you alluded to, I think the writing is on the wall there that we can expect to see them in IMSA, whether that's in 27 or a year later in 2028, as we're seeing with Genesis. I think that the second option is maybe a little bit more likely, although I'm not too sure right now. I think really for Ford, their main priority is getting on the grid at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I mean, that is pretty much the definitive race for Ford's motorsports history. If you talk about their motorsports heritage, their first thing is always going to be 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans. They made a movie about it. I think that's clearly going to be their main priority. Of course, you're going to want to have that North American market representation in there as well. IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship is going to provide a great opportunity for them to do that. They are already represented in IMSA right now with their Multimatic GTD Pro program. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see sort of a continuation or an evolution of that program into a prototype GTP program. But as of right now, sticking with the World Endurance Championship side of things right off the bat. It is interesting you bring up the number of manufacturers that we're going to have. I went through the liberty of trying to figure out how many manufacturers we can have on the grid in 2027 if none of these manufacturers leave in between. I'll say I'd be a little surprised personally if all of these manufacturers are on the grid and we don't have maybe one of them pull out in the meantime. That is baseless speculation, but I think some of these manufacturers are a little bit more, let's say, in jeopardy than some others, or not quite as stable as some others. But if you just go down the list of what we have now and then add on what we're going to have in the next couple of years, you have Alpine, Aston Martin, BMW, Cadillac, Ferrari, Ford, Genesis, McLaren, not confirmed, but
yeah,
let's just all agree in unison that they're probably going to be there in 27.
Mm-hmm.
Peugeot, Porsche, Toyota. Bare minimum, if you only account for the 2 factory cars in the grid and 0 customer cars, you're looking at 20, and if you include McLaren, 22 cars on the grid there between 10 to 11 manufacturers. And again, that's without any customer cars whatsoever. Also have to consider the possibility that maybe Honda is on the grid in a few years as well. There's been some more stories recently indicating that they're at least evaluating it a bit heavier than they were maybe a year ago. Racer had a pretty good article put out by Stephen Kilby and Graham Goodwin about that. I'll link that in the description of the show. If they're joining as well, 24 cars on the grid up to, and again, still not including customer cars, we're going to have a lot of questions to answer here. And I think the main one really becomes, you have a 20 to 24 car hypercar grid. You have a 40 car real capacity is what they're working towards for the World Endurance Championship at least. What's got to give? Because you're working with currently 18 cars in the LMGT3 class, 18 cars over in Hypercar as well. If we bump that Hypercar number up 2, 4, maybe 6 additional cars in the grid, you're going to have to see a limitation of some of those GT or those LMGT3 teams. You're going to have to limit some of the privateer entries. I think that's going to be the real question that we have to start thinking about.
Yeah, it's been a topic for the last couple of years, right? When the entry lists have come out, there's been more entries than the grid can handle, especially in this top class where we've gone through it already with the privateers. There's not a privateer that has really survived to stay on the grid to this point. And now you're looking at just pure auto manufacturers that remain. And you can't turn any of these away, right? You put in this formula to try to attract all of these manufacturers and the manufacturer participation, and now you're stuck with a new problem: is what do we do with them all? You alluded to maybe limiting the size of the LMGT3 grid, which is certainly an option. But then the negative that comes with that, apart from there just being fewer LMGT3 cars, are you're also limiting gentleman drivers and their ability to get on the grid and compete at Le Mans. Something that's been it's a huge part of sports car racing, regardless of what championship you're talking about, is the ability for these gentleman drivers to come in and win some of any pretty much of the biggest races around the world. So limiting that, and we know that there's a lot of sponsorship dollars that come in with that. So you're kind of trading off maybe business dollars for manufacturer dollars to a certain extent. it certainly it's interesting, right? And at the end of the day, too, I mean, you mentioned that entire list where we could be at 2020, 22, 24. That's not mentioning the possibility of Mercedes as well,
Yeah.
who Prado points out in the chat. It's not considering, albeit it may be a long shot at this point, but the potential return of like a Lamborghini. If Lamborghini got everything together, like they would be in a
Yeah.
conversation there. So there's, man, it's something we're going to be talking about for a while, right? As each one of these manufacturers are confirmed and it gets closer to their debut, it's just going to become more of a talking point. Like, you can expand the grids to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, the tracks that they're visiting are a bottleneck. The
Yeah.
logistics of transporting all of these vehicles, like from one place in the world across an ocean to a completely different continent, it's all stuff that needs to be considered, and how who knows how they're going to handle it, right?
A lot of decisions I'm glad I don't have to make personally.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean, we're talking about the WEC here. Look, you can say the exact same thing about IMSA. We're at
yep.
essentially capacity grids for the WeatherTech Championship right now as well. They may not have quite as many hypercar slash GTP cars on the grid as the World Endurance Championship, but they have two extra classes on the grid right now. So
Yep.
is that a decision that IMSA is going to have to make as well? Potentially, are we going to have to sacrifice one of these classes? We already saw them do it with LMP3. I got to be honest, I think the answer is probably going to be yes.
The one thing that IMSA has, like, I don't want to say going for them, but maybe is a little bit to their benefit, or would be to their benefit in a situation like this, is they're not mandating that all of these cars run the full season.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of cars that will just run the Endurance Cup, for instance. So maybe being able to get a manufacturer on to just run, the Endurance Cup races, or if they only have the budget to run the Endurance Cup races, it's always a possibility, as opposed to, with the WEC, they have to commit to the entire calendar. Maybe that runs in IMSA's favor a little bit. The capacity at the tracks that they have the Endurance Cup races at are generally larger than some of the other circuits they run, like I guess the GTPs don't go to CTMP anymore, but your street circuits, things like that. So they have that going for them a little bit. But you mentioned that they could start to take away some entries from like LMP2 or GTD if need be in those situations, and it could be a reality for IMSA as well.
Well, I think it's going to almost certainly be a reality is someone's going to have to get the boot because we're already at capacity grids at Daytona this year anyways.
Yeah.
And their interest list, we'll say, before the actual entry list for Daytona was close to 100 cars going into 2025. So you have to imagine a few years from now with additional GTP manufacturers on the grid, it's going to be even higher. I can't see the interest in GT3 racing in the two GTD classes dwindling anytime soon.
No.
And LMP2 is always going to have its place in IMSA right now as well with the level of gentleman drivers they have in that class. So it's, again, a tough decision, one that I'm really glad I don't have to be involved with. You also have to consider, throughout all of this, the introduction of hydrogen to prototype racing. We know right now that this is something that's been delayed by the World Endurance Championship. They wanted to have it on the grid, well, around right now, honestly, when it was initially penned. It's been pushed back year after year. We're now at a 2028 scheduled debut for a partial season run. I believe there are 3 races that they were eyeing for 2028, being Spa, Fuji, and Le Mans. That was from the tail end of last year we started hearing about that. Does that whole plan to bring that class into the fray change? Because the whole plan for that class is to be, those cars should be competitive for the overall win. Ideally, those are going to be cars that have to be balanced to the same level as these GTP and hypercars.
Yep.
We've had interest already shown from Toyota, Alpine, BMW into the hydrogen ranks. Toyota said they want to run a hydrogen-powered car alongside their petrol-powered hypercar. These are all questions that I have to keep playing back in my head right now because we're not sure how it's all going to factor in. To be honest with you, I'm starting to think that the amount of interest that we're seeing in this new formula far exceeds what they were expecting during these initial roundtable discussions. I mean, we're at a point now where, look, we've had in the past discussions, manufacturers will sit around table talks and they'll say, yeah, we would be interested in something like this. Half of them usually don't end up committing to the formula. We'll hear rumbling.
Yeah.
I mean, we heard rumblings about Ford during the DPI days. They didn't officially commit to a DPI program. It never really made it past the talking stages. What we're seeing here is essentially every manufacturer, barring a couple at this point, who have shown interest in this formula, have committed to it by now. And if they haven't committed yet, they're heavily rumored to be doing so in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I don't think we would have thought, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, that we'd be sitting here talking about, the likes of Ford, Genesis, McLaren. Well, I mean, McLaren, I guess, has been rumored for a little while, but there's a lot of manufacturers that kind of came out of the woodwork with this, and that we wouldn't have necessarily expected to be interested in a top flight program, and they've dove in head first. And who have we honestly heard as a rumored manufacturer at this point that really hasn't turned out to, hasn't followed through and ended up building a car? I mean, okay, aside from Audi or something like that, I mean, Alfa Romeo had the rumors. They haven't confirmed. But now that Ford is confirmed, it sounds like McLaren, we're going to get that confirmation soon. Mercedes sounds pretty serious about it. I can't really... It's hard to pin down very many manufacturers that haven't followed through on that serious level of interest and created a car. And as you pointed out, this is something that we're not used to. We're kind of used to the disappointment at the end of the day, where it's there was so much hype, there was hype building towards it, and then it just never really came to be. But that's just kind of a reflection of the success of this formula, and it's clearly been successful. Where does that line, where does it become too successful for its own good, I guess? Is that a realistic question that we're going to have to be asking? If you can do such a thing,
soon? Sure.
Yeah, it's man, I hate to just say something like it's going to be interesting to see how these next few seasons play out, but it is going to be eye-opening to see how these next few seasons play out, because who knows what direction it's going to go. If, what the future of LMGT3 holds, what the future of some of these hypercar manufacturers hold. It's very exciting. I want to say that completely, but there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, and look, also, we talked about this at the end of last show as well. Rule set right now is extended through the end of the 2029 season for both championships. We're at a point where I think serious discussions are going to need to be had towards the end of this year, maybe early next year, about, do we extend this even further? If we're talking about a 2027 debut for Ford, rule set's only around until the end of 29 right now. If Ford wants to be on the grid for longer than 3 seasons, you're going to have McLaren probably in the same time frame. Mercedes, I know they're on the outside looking in right now as well. They've been pretty heavily rumored at this point. I don't want to say heavily. I don't want to overstate it, but definitely more than they have in previous years. Genesis, we talked about this exact same thing with Genesis as well, because they're going to be on track for a 26 debut in the WEC and 27 in IMSA. We brought up the exact same talking point there. I think this is going to be something that, yeah, if you're a top executive in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship or the World Endurance Championship, we probably want to start talking about whether we should extend this rule set beyond 2029. Or if not, is there sort of an evolution of this rule set that we can get all these manufacturers to agree to? Because right now it's clearly working. All of the manufacturers are signed up for this. They're all interested in it. And there's a bit of everything in there for anyone. If you want to have that flexibility to go out and build a fully fledged prototype that's to your specification, your own custom hybrid unit, more freedom with the actual design regulations of the car, go build a Le Mans Hypercar. If you want to get an off-the-shelf chassis with an off-the-shelf hybrid unit and go do it on a budget and still be competitive, look at what Porsche did in both championships last year. Go build an LMDh car. And hydrogen coming into the fray as well. If you want to really be on the cutting edge of energy sources of tomorrow, we'll say, go build a hydrogen powered car. And in an ideal world, those cars will be balanced to the same specification as these other two formulas. You're right. We're sort of making an open playground right now where everyone's invited. And sure enough, when you do that, maybe there's not enough room on the swing set for everyone.
That's exactly it. It's I think it's almost a no-brainer to extend the regulations at least. I don't think you're going to get anybody moaning or groaning about extending the regulations for at least another few years. But it's especially if you start to if there's actual traction with the hydrogen formula, and the hydrogen formula can be seamlessly integrated into compete against the current cars that we have on the grid. If that is truly the case, then yeah, it is definitely a no-brainer to extend the regulations essentially, kind of as they are, open them up to the hydrogen, the hydrogen cars, and call it a day for another few seasons. When sports car racing can sometimes like to tinker a little bit to their detriment at times. So don't ruin what's a good thing before its time is up. But it's a great time to be a sports car racing fan, right? We've said that for a few years now.
No one's arguing that.
And we're going to be saying it for a while longer.
Yeah, with any luck, at least. Let's bring it back a little bit here to Ford. They were the primary talking point here.
Yes.
Talking earlier, we don't have any official confirmation on chassis manufacturer for this yet. Of course, Ford is heavily tied in with Multimatic right now. With their GT program, they've been partnered with Multimatic for a long time now, dating back to the Ford GT program. Multimatic already has their hands kind of full. They're working with Porsche on the 963. Yeah. They're working with Aston Martin on the Valkyrie. We've heard, I believe Dallara is also in the picture as well. It sounds like Graham Goodwin is more confident than not about Orica as a chassis supplier, who of course works with Acura right now, and will also be working with Genesis, and they also work with Alpine as well. So I'll wait and see what we get for official confirmation on that, because it seems like it's anyone's best guess right now. Of course, you also want to talk about engine supplier for that. Ford executives, this is your chance to draw in some of that allure that Cadillac is bringing with their naturally aspirated V8. I'm just saying. Yep. I'm sure a lot of fans wouldn't object to that. But we'll have to see what they decide for the power unit route of that car.
A couple of North American manufacturers rumbling around the track would be, I think that would make a lot of people very happy, especially stateside.
Yeah. I want to catch up with what a couple of people are saying in the chat about this. Nomi Good is saying, something I've been talking about is how we need to extend the regs. You're talking about what I'm talking about right now. Yeah, that's really the $1 million question is, do you extend the regulations first of all? I think the obvious answer is yes. But then how you actually do it is the next question. How do you factor in the new hydrogen cars? Do you factor in the new hydrogen cars, or are the manufacturers content with where they are right now? All three of those manufacturers I noted for hydrogen are already committed and already racing, for that matter, in the current rule set that we have. Do you need to bring hydrogen on board to keep them in the series? If the answer is yes, I think that becomes something you have to evaluate a lot stronger. Really, that's the name of the game right there, is how do you keep these manufacturers that you already have satisfied and in the championship for longer? Andrew Kissinger in the chat saying, expect IMSA partner team announcement for Genesis in May/June time. Yeah, I think that's around the time I was expecting when they announced the timeline for that program. Of course, we won't be seeing them on track for IMSA for about a season and a half from that point. But on-track testing will probably start sometime earlier next year, I would assume, for that IMSA team. So I'll keep an eye out for that announcement, of course.
Yep.
See. When I raised that question a few days ago on the sub, someone raised the point that there's probably something in the... All right, let me restart this. There's probably already something in motion to extend the rules if Ford and McLaren are happy to come in 27. Yeah, that's what I would imagine, is there's sort of a under-the-table confirmation from the sanctioning bodies, or the organizers, rather, that, yes, if you join this rule set, we're at least heavily considering extending this rule set, so it'll be more worth your time to get in there. I'll be honest, the WEC might have shot themselves in the foot with the two-car rule. Talked about that before. I don't want to get myself in trouble here. It is something that, yeah, sure, you can look at it that way. Aston might have only had a one-car program in the WEC. It might have been one less car they had to worry about, if having too many cars in the grid is such a thing to worry about in a championship.
Lamborghini might still be around.
Yeah. It does bring me back to a point I wanted to make, which specifically for the WEC, how do you get the number of cars down? Or who do you sort of push off to the side, so to speak, if you have too much interest on the grid? And to be honest with you, I think the first group to go would probably be the privateer hypercars. That's pure speculation on my side, but everything we've seen in recent history indicates that the WEC is trying to make the hypercar class sort of like a manufacturer's championship of sorts, where it's similar-ish to F1. You have two cars that are competing for the manufacturer's title, or in F1's sake, the constructor's title. And that's the way that they're trying to structure it. We saw that sort of in place with the two-car mandate. I would see them pushing the privateers to the side first, and then LMGT3, if they have to restrict a manufacturer there as well, maybe you see two fewer cars in that class as well. I don't know how you'd go about doing that, but that's the most logical thing I can think of for their sake. There's no way that they're going to push a manufacturer who's committed off to the side in the hypercar class. But also, as to your point earlier, Stu, I think it is more difficult to throw aside an LMGT3 team before a privateer hypercar team because of the gentleman drivers that you're bringing to the grid there, who are very important for not only funding the series, just pretty much mainly that, bringing funding to the series that otherwise wouldn't be there in as large a capacity.
It's I mean, we talk, I think we might have talked about it with Jonah, the thought of using ELMS or ALMS or something like that as a sort of a privateer hypercar type championship that would award, spots on the grid at Le Mans, which, ultimately that is, I mean, these teams want to run all of the races of the season, but the real gem is Le Mans, right? So, if the WEC does go the route of removing the privateer entries from the grid to free up some grid spots, then I think you would probably, maybe a precursor to that even happening would be the introduction of a privateer championship to try and build up a bit of a grid there to make that transition easier.
I think that you're right. We brought that up in the last episode. I think that is, if the teams are on board, a very logical step forward.
Yeah.
The ACO has 2 other championships right now that are regional championships. They're a lot lower cost to run. They already use those 2 championships to provide auto invites for the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which, as you said, is what most of these teams are really after. Mm-hmm. If you have enough interest, and it doesn't need to be a record grid, it can be...
No. It could be 5 cars.
Yeah, 5 or 6 hypercars on a grid in the European Le Mans Series. I can't see anything really wrong with that, especially if you had interest from some of the customer teams that we have right now. Proton, if A, of course, wants to run a 499P in the European Le Mans Series. Maybe, I don't think this is quite as likely, but maybe if you wanted to get some of those boutique manufacturers back on the grid, if like a Vanwall was interested in running the European Le Mans Series.
And for it might increase the level of interest of privateers going racing with these top flight cars, because you're not having to worry about the logistics and the cost of transporting a car from, all over the globe to Brazil, to Fuji, to the US, back to Europe. Like, you don't have to worry about all the costs that are associated with that. The European Le Mans Series is that European, right? The Asian Le Mans Series is how many weekends is it? It's not even that many. It's like 3, 4.
More than that now.
Is it 4 weekends? Well, I know there's more races than that, but
we're just talking
the number of race weekends is because they usually have double headers. So
yeah, but I think we're up to 4 or 5.
Okay. But still, I mean, 4 or 5 race weekends all in the Asian continent, that's that's a lot more doable than globetrotting around with this car. So we talk about there's a lot of interest in this class already. That could increase the interest a lot more, especially amongst the privateers, and with that extra little cherry on top of the champion getting an invite to Le Mans, or the top 2 cars, whatever it might be, getting that invite to Le Mans, then that could be big.
Yeah. As I said, I think, to me, that's one of the most logical steps forward they can take.
Yeah.
Dove Jones pointing out in the chat that there was a consideration from the ACO already with specifically the Asian Le Mans Series, but if you have European teams interested as well, perhaps an avenue they want to evaluate for the ELMS as well. Hopefully we'll hear something on that in the future. I do want to move things on to the next story that we have for tonight. I'll try to get back to some of those questions later on in the chat, because there's plenty piling on already, which I appreciate. But we also, on the prototype racing front, this is going to be a very prototype-heavy episode, by the way. Just say that off the bat. Got confirmation on the Aston Martin Valkyrie drivers and who we'll be seeing in those cars for the WEC and IMSA this year. Of course, the WEC being a 2-car program with cars 007 and 009, we also got the livery unveilings for those cars recently as well. 007 in the WEC will be driven by Harry Tinknell, Tom Gamble, and Ross Gunn. And the car 009 will be driven by Alex Riberas, Marco Sorensen, and Roman DeAngelis. One note for Ross Gunn and Roman DeAngelis, for the longer endurance races only. You're looking at Qatar, Bahrain, and particularly Le Mans for those. Tom Gamble, sort of an interesting driver to note, was a McLaren factory driver. Recently, or previously raced for the Heart of Racing as well. He had raced with them in some of the IMSA Michelin Endurance Cup races in both GTD and GTD Pro a couple of seasons back, I think dating back to 2022. great to see him getting that call up to a prototype. It will not be his first race in prototype machinery, period. He raced in the European Le Mans Series and some LMP2 machinery before, but first time up in the hypercar ranks, and with one of the fan favorite cars for sure. All British lineup in that car, 007, which I'm sure will excite some of the Brits as well. Over on the IMSA side, one car running in the IMSA WeatherTech Championship this year for the remaining races of the season, starting with Sebring. Car number 23, it'll be Ross Gunn and Roman DeAngelis. We're still waiting on confirmation for a third driver, who I would expect to see at some of the longer endurance races, notably Sebring and Petit Le Mans. Yeah, I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say about it. Like I said, we got to see the liveries of these new cars as well. We have a lot of experienced drivers in this lineup, a lot of drivers who've been with Aston Martin for a long time, some drivers who've been with the Heart of Racing for a long time as well. Stu, I want to get your thoughts particularly on the IMSA side, because I think Ross Gunn, Roman DeAngelis, we've seen these two drivers and what they're capable of doing in their respective cars. They're getting the call up to prototype machinery really for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick a weak driver out of this lineup that Aston Martin has confirmed, but I think we've kind of talked a little bit about who we anticipated some of these driver lineups to be in the past, and I think we both came to the agreement that Ross Gunn and Roman DeAngelis were the favorites for that IMSA ride, and that's come to be. They're very familiar with the championship. They're very familiar with Heart of Racing, and both of them, I guess Ross Gunn, I don't know where he came from before he kind of got on as an Aston Martin factory driver, or if he worked his way up through their driver program. But I know for sure DeAngelis has slowly worked his way up through the Heart of Racing system, and now is getting an opportunity with Aston Martin as one of their elite drivers. So this pairing is going to be a strong one. We've seen them win a championship in IMSA in the GTD class. I know at least DeAngelis did. I don't remember if Gunn was part of that car, but regardless, this is a team. This is an organization that knows how to win. They have a lot of championship winning and championship caliber drivers in their lineups, and man, if the Valkyrie give it a season and a half, to get up to pace with some of the other manufacturers, and it's not going to be the driver lineups that are holding that car back at the end of the day. So really good to see these cars and the driver lineups confirmed. The cars themselves look great. You have the nice British racing green, I think it's usually referred to as, on the Aston Martin, which always looks great. And then you have the more Heart of Racing branded IMSA entry with the blue that looks very familiar, or very similar to their current GTD entries. So good looking cars. Obviously, it sounds good. I think it's also been confirmed that they are going to be straight piping that. So fans around the world can let out a sigh of relief, because that car is going to sound incredible in less than a month's time.
Well, yeah, really less than a month's time, because we have the World Endurance Championship at the end of the month, and then Sebring about 4.5 weeks from now. Good shout there on Roman DeAngelis, of course, starting out with the Heart of Racing in the GTD class and working his way up, now up in a prototype seat in both championships. Going to be in that car fighting for the overall win at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I mean, that's really this type of story you love to see in sports car racing. Somebody who's starting in those lower Pro-Am ranks and then working his way up to this full factory pro program, fighting for overall wins and championships. I think that's a great story there. And of course, we'll see him doing the exact same in the IMSA championship this year as well. Also got some announcements recently on some of the Jota driver pairings, or just confirmation on Jota driver pairings that we'll be seeing in the World Endurance Championship. This is for Hertz Team Jota, or Cadillac Hertz Team Jota now. Had to get that team name proper. Making that switch over from the two-car Porsche 963 program they had. You'll be seeing Will Stevens and Norman Nato in car number 12, joined by Alex Lynn, driver who's been around the Cadillac ranks for quite a while now. And Earl Bamber and Sebastian Bourdais teaming up with Jenson Button in the number 38 car. Particularly interested or excited to see Sebastian Bourdais continue his full-time ride in Cadillac GTP/Hypercar machinery. I think it was a real loss to see him fall out from the GTP ranks in the IMSA championship.
Yeah.
And no discredit to his position in IMSA right now, racing for Tower and the Michelin Endurance Cup races. Actually, he's full season there, right?
Full season,
except for
minus
the Clash races.
Which is CTMP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really excited to see that he's able to stay fighting for overall wins in that Cadillac program. And I really do think that Jota program is going to be a race-winning program this year. We already saw what they were capable of last year. Now they have full backing from Cadillac. I think only big things are going to be coming for them this year.
Yeah, this is going to be one of those programs to watch, like really watch in the WEC. We saw Jota win, as a privateer. We were talking. It's funny how we transitioned from talking about privateer entries in the WEC to a team that has stepped up from being a privateer to now being a factory outfit, and whereas when they were a privateer, it was not necessarily a surprise, but it was a goal for them to go out and upset those factory programs and win a race or two. Now that they're a factory outfit, it's expected that they are going to go out, win races, and compete for a championship. So everything's gonna be cranked up to another level. But again, you look at these driver lineups. These are strong driver lineups right here. It is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to watching the Bamber Bourdais Button car. The the 3Bs. I'm sure there's going to be some clever nicknames that are out for that 38 entry. But two strong driver lineups here. The expectation is going to be for them to win races, and try and compete with your Ferraris, your Toyotas, your Porsches up there for the championship.
Yeah, I think the last part there is really the big thing. Is this is a team that really should be in the fight for the championship this year. They have a two-car program. They've already shown what they're capable of, and they have more backing behind them than they did with that Porsche program, where they were really a customer behind the factory 963 program from Penske. I think that's going to be the big thing for them this year, is can they be in contention for the championship?
Yep, absolutely.
And I'll move things on now to our last story of the day, which might be a little bit of a shorter episode, which is good because our last one
don't jinx it now.
I don't want to jinx it, but our last one was like 2 hours and 15 minutes or something.
That's true.
Actually going for the record in the last episode. I went back and made sure it was the longest episode we ever did, even before you joined the podcast, and it actually was.
Oh, man.
But we do want to talk about Lamborghini and their SC63 program, because we got some more indication recently. This was really something that came out a couple weeks ago at this point, of course, right after our last episode as well, on really what Lamborghini's strategy is with that program this year. We saw that program didn't really take the exact direction that maybe we were anticipating towards the latter stages of last season. I know around Petit Le Mans, I was talking to you at the track saying, and we were both really in agreement that we're probably going to see at least one Lamborghini SC63 full-time in IMSA this year. and then maybe a second car for the Michelin Endurance Cup races. Turns out we're not seeing that second car, and we're only seeing one car, and it's only running in the 5 MEC races for this year. It is a factory-backed team run by Riley, but under the Lamborghini Squadra Corsa banner. And really what we learned from recent reports is that they're treating 2025 as sort of a development year for that car. A car that got off to a rocky start, had a crash in testing that really affected the homologation of that car. They're looking to put some upgrades on the car that'll hopefully improve its drivability, give it a little bit more pace and performance, but only doing that over the course of the 5 IMSA endurance races this year. The plan for next year is to not continue with the factory effort that we're seeing this year, but instead to hand the car over to customer teams, open the car up to see if any customers are interested in running it, particularly in IMSA, where it seems like that's really where their main focus is right now, is on that North American market. If customers are interested. Doesn't sound like the plan is to continue with that factory program if no customers are interested, although I suppose that can change. All right, here's the $1 million question. Will there be any customers who want to foot the bill for that? You have a car right now that, okay, let's be honest, Daytona didn't go too well. It showed some potential last year, but it was very sort of inconsistent, we'll say. I think Indianapolis was by and large the most promising result we saw out of that car. In the World Endurance Championship, there was really nothing that stood out too much for it. And right now in IMSA, you have 2 customer programs in the GTP class. You have JDC and you have Proton. Proton's only racing in the Michelin Endurance Cup races right now.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a team like JDC, do you walk away from a race-winning, championship-winning formula that is the Porsche 963 and switch over to a Lamborghini SC63, albeit you might get some more factory support than you're getting with Porsche right now? You might get some more factory drivers in that car. I think that's the main question right now. I don't know. I want to get some of your thoughts on this first, but I do have some other thoughts to toss on after that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll start with, is there a current privateer that you could see, jumping over to Lamborghini? IMSA side, I think probably not. I mean, you look at, like, JDC would probably be the only realistic, choice for that. Although, if Proton were to take on something, take on something with Lamborghini, then, I guess it's not, completely out of the question. But if you're looking at this from JDC's perspective, it is still, they're a pretty small team. When it's all said and done, especially, you compare them to the other programs in the GTP class. It'd be obviously a lot of investment to just go and switch manufacturers. So I don't know if I would see that. Maybe there's a team that you could see step up, that is currently running in another racing discipline in North America, maybe like an IndyCar type program, that could have some interest and see this as a way to get onto the grid in the top flight. But it's difficult to, like, we haven't seen very many privateer teams come forward yet. More of them have come forward in the WEC, but you look at some of those privateer efforts and they're junior factory efforts at the end of the day. Like, so I hope Lamborghini stays on the grid. I really do. I hope that, we actually just heard some positive news out of that effort, that they're going to be testing at Sebring after initially not going to be there. So that I think that is a really positive sign for that program as a whole. And we're coming into the car's first full trip around the sun in both championship. Well, I guess it's only in IMSA now, but its first full trip around the sun in IMSA. So we all know that going back to tracks that they already have data from is going to be helpful. They can hopefully they can start. I know there's a lot of work that they have to do on some of the reliability aspects of that car and just outright performance, but hopefully using some of that data from last year, they can actually extract a lot more of that performance out of the car and have some solid runs like we were hoping from them out of Daytona. But, to tie this all back to, the thought of, could we see Lamborghini sort of in that more customer-based program focus for next year? I don't know I don't think I'd be putting money on it, but I hope that we do. Even if it could still be with Riley. If Riley is able to do, just the Michelin Endurance Cup, then that would be fantastic, I think. I think that we've already talked about this, but that relationship could be really positive for just the overall development of that car, given Riley's history. And what we know they're capable of. So fingers are crossed, but I'm not holding my breath.
So here's what you get as, and this is going to sound like a sales pitch, but come buy our SC63 and here's
no. I like this. Let's go full salesman on this.
if you're a customer and you start an SC63 program next year, what you're getting that you don't get with other manufacturers is essentially untapped access to Lamborghini's fleet of factory drivers. If you're a Porsche customer team, and I touched on this a few minutes ago, but if you're a Porsche customer team, you're not going to get top grabs on the Kevin Esters of the world. Likewise, if you were, say, an Acura factory team or a Cadillac factory team, or customer team, with Lamborghini not showing interest in continuing as a factory outfit next year, I would have to imagine that Lamborghini is going to let, if there is a customer who's interested in running that car, they're going to let some of those top factory drivers run that car. And that's something that, if you're a JDC, maybe that's to your advantage, because now you have a strong driver lineup. Not to say their lineup right now isn't strong, but you have a proper factory, through and through lineup that you can use to compete for wins. Yeah. Whether it's the full season or just some of the larger endurance races. Historically, I'll say one thing, which is that I don't think the current formula right now between Hypercar and GTP has been as customer friendly as like DPI was. Where you could really see, especially in like the earlier days when it was the LMP2 and DPI cars were mixed. We saw Core nearly win the championship back in 2018, I believe. 2018, with a Orca 7. I don't think that the current cars are quite at that level.
Nope. I think we lost you. I think. But to carry on while Chris figures out what happened there, there were a lot of GT or DPI customer entries on the grid, even if you disregard the LMP2 entries that we had there. You had Junko's Hollinger? They had an entry on the grid, a customer entry in DPI. Of course, you had. I guess Action Express has always been very closely tied to GM, but maybe they're not so much a customer entry. But we always had some of those customer entries kicking around, and since the introduction of the LMDh formula and going back to going to GTP, and it's, I guess, a large part of that has to be a large part of the reason why we don't see as many, privateer efforts has to be because of the cost of these cars, right? Like, I mean, one of the things that was very important about this formula was making sure that costs were kept under control. But I think it's very safe to say that the costs are higher than they were initially, aiming for.
Yeah. Can you hear me again now?
Yes, you're good.
Perfect. My monitor went blank, which was the first time that happened in over a year of doing this podcast, and kicked my sound out, but that's okay. We're back. I don't know what the last thing you heard from me was, but that's exactly the direction I was going. Is I think the costs for the current formula are maybe a prohibiting factor for more customer interest, because we're starting to see manufacturers express more interest in having customer teams. I know David Salters recently said that Acura is starting to open up to customers if there was interest there. Porsche had a freeze on customer programs. I don't know if that's been lifted quite yet. But obviously they already have some customers on the grid. But we just haven't seen quite the same level of interest that we had previously with the DPI class. And so I do wonder if having no full factory program on the grid would be a real issue, and something that makes customer teams wary of really signing on with that manufacturer. Really, you're in charge of a lot at that point. You're in charge of the development of the car, or at least assisting with the development of the car. And you don't have a factory team to sort of share data with either. So I would have to wonder if that plays into the decision for some of these teams on whether or not they decide to go with a manufacturer like Lamborghini. But who knows? I'll say one thing right now. I'll play a little game, which I love to do, a recurring segment on the show called Baseless Speculation, which is there is one manufacturer, or I keep saying manufacturer when I mean team. There's one team in the offseason in IMSA that made a surprise switch from one manufacturer to Lamborghini, who has talked before about maybe we'd do Hypercar if the right group was there with us. And who am I talking about?
You're talking about FAF.
I am. And that's, if I got to take a dart and throw it at the board right now, FAF is going to be one of the 3 darts that I throw at the board. Of, maybe this is in their game plan. Maybe this is why they wanted to make that switch over to Lamborghini. We saw they were very competitive at Daytona this year, albeit in GT3 machinery. Yeah. Maybe this is step 1 for them to step up to a larger role with Lamborghini and run a prototype program for them. I don't know. That's complete baseless speculation. But if we want to be fun with it, maybe a plaid SC63 on the grid would be a fun thing to see.
Oh man, that would make a lot of people very happy. I think the biggest thing, like with FAF, and I think it's like they're a small operation in the IMSA like scheme of things. I mean, there are plenty of small operations, but probably the smallest of the GTP efforts. Which is one of the reasons why there was such the struggle, the frantic, trying to get onto the grid, or what are their plans going to be? The uncertainty around the team in the off season largely came down to money. So if Lamborghini were going to provide the funding, then I don't see why FAF would say no. That would be a logical step for a team that's won, a lot in IMSA over the past, 5 years. So, it would make a lot of sense, but, as with many things in racing, the dollars have to be there, for it to make sense. And, I don't know if Lamborghini's looking for a customer-based, largely customer-funded, probably program. Oh, I don't know.
Maybe that's a stronger ask, but
it could be difficult. But like I said, I mean, there are other there are other teams, there are other North American, teams in other motorsports disciplines who have, expressed interest in running sports cars. I wouldn't call it likely that we could see one of them come over, but if you are one of those, if you're a team that is running in another championship, then maybe the Lamborghini makes a bit of sense. Like, if it might make sense, but I don't know. I'm struggling to see a customer-based effort for Lamborghini and this car. I feel like that's going to be difficult, but I hope it happens, obviously.
Yeah. Well, and as you mentioned earlier, to IMSA's credit, they do have the flexibility of allowing a team to just run the endurance races if they want, which are going to be the races with the most eyes on the car, and you don't have to commit to the full season. Maybe that's something that we see instead. It's sort of where we're seeing Lamborghini right now. It's where we saw them last year as well. Maybe a continuation of something like that, albeit just with a new customer team behind them. We'll see. I would love to see Lamborghini on the grid next year.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that something comes to fruition for that, especially if they can make all the upgrades to the car this year. Perhaps some of the races later on this year, if we see them start to show some real pace, maybe that's a consideration that a team like JDC takes a look at.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Yeah, if speed hides a lot of maybe unattractive qualities of the car, and if that car can come out and have some good runs as the season goes on, then I think that would probably go a long way in some more teams kicking tires on running it in 2026.
Yep. All right, I think we can go back to some questions now. To wrap up the episode and maybe keep this shy of 2 hours and 15 minutes. But start off with a question from Taurus. We're going back to the Ford announcement here, saying, do you think Ford's announcement might make some manufacturers on the edge want to stay in to ride that wave of popularity? I think it's definitely going to be a factor, yes, because you're looking at a major OEM in the motorsports space continuing on and showing their faith in the format or in the formula. I don't think that's really the concern, though, for a lot of manufacturers. I think if you ask every single team on the grid right now and every team principal, do you have full intention on staying in the grid or on the grid until the end of 2029? At least all of them would say yes. The main concern to me is in the board for some of these manufacturers, where if you have a program that's been around for a couple of seasons, it's not really showing the performance that you anticipated. The program costs more money than you initially budgeted for. These are things that can get brought up in a board meeting, and then they say, all right, look, we're not going to fund this anymore. The program's not bringing us enough success. We got to cut costs somewhere. This program's not doing enough for us. That's what we got to do. We've seen that before in sports car racing many times, and it's happened sometimes to programs that were really at the top of their game. So I don't want to rule that out as a possibility. I don't want to be too pessimistic about it, because obviously I'm not hoping for that. Nobody is. But when I mention that, here's the cars that we could see on the grid in 2027, I don't want to guarantee that all of the cars we have on the grid right now are still going to be there in a few seasons' time. That is something that's still up in the air.
I like Prado's last comment here. We need a Fusion, a Ford Fusion. I assume they're talking about the Ford Fusion into the WEC and IMSA.
Yeah. Another question, though, from the same person. Why go hydrogen prototype racing if you have 100% eco fuel? Very valid question, but I think one that you'd have to ask the manufacturers. At the end of the day, the game right now has shifted from how do we attract manufacturers to how do we keep manufacturers. They've already gotten basically everyone they could hope for and more. Now you need to see what those manufacturers are looking for. And again, let's go back to talking about boring board meetings for manufacturers. and you look on the board of directors for some of these major OEMs and see what they're looking for their brand to represent. If their brand wants to align with the hydrogen market, Toyota's been pushing pretty hard for that recent years, then maybe that's a non-negotiable for them. That's something that they need to see on the grid in order for them to stay involved as a manufacturer. And that's just an example. I'm not saying that that's something that's actually happening, but really that's the reason why you would want to go hydrogen racing in the first place, or at least allow an avenue for manufacturers to go if they want to, because some of these manufacturers, that could be something that they look at and say, okay, we're not going to continue in our current space if we can't create an evolution of this car to push the technologies of tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, all these racing programs are, it's not just for the manufacturers to go out and have some fun at a racetrack. It's, there needs to be, they need to be able to extract learnings from these cars and apply them to the cars that they're selling to us. And, if the manufacturers believe that that hydrogen is the future, then they're going to want to focus on hydrogen. If it's something else that's, if that idea changes from now, over the next couple of seasons, then we could be talking about sort of a different future formula for the class. But I think it's going to be one of the reasons why we've seen so much success in the formula that we have now is because clearly the manufacturers see benefit in it, and that's going to be really important no matter what the next step is for the LMDh / hypercar regulations, that the manufacturers are able to see the value in it. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yep. Is it safe to say LMP2 at Le Mans could be compromised in the future due to the amount of hypercar entries we see coming in? I'll be honest.
Hasn't it?
Well, at Le Mans, no.
Well,
in the WEC, yes.
But
you mean in terms of just how
limited.
Many entries there? Yeah,
it's much more limited now.
Right, and I think that's probably what we're going to see is a continuation of limiting those teams. To be honest with you, I would like to see LMP. I mean, if this is just me in charge at this point where we are in sports car racing, at this point, LMP2 should be full Pro-Am. We have that Pro-Am subclass at Le Mans where it's, that you're getting separate trophies for it. We're at a point now, and I guess it made sense in what year did that start? 2020, 2021? I think it was 2020 we started having that subclass.
Yeah.
Made sense back then when you had 5 prototypes in the top class, but now you have 20 plus.
You're running out of all-pro driver lineups.
You got to simplify. Well, it's not all-pro. It's really just, do you have a bronze driver in the car?
Yeah, yeah.
And
no, but I'm saying the pro. What the driver requirements? Obviously, for the Pro-Am, you need to have the bronze driver in the car for LMP2 Pro-Am. But for LMP2, the Pro class, you could have. Right?
You see the problem with this now that we're because LMP2 is inherently a Pro-Am class. And then you have a Pro-Am subclass of. So that's the first thing I would say is, look, if you're not going to be a Pro-Am team here, sorry.
Yeah.
Figure it out. Get a bronze driver in the car, because that's ultimately what LMP2 is supposed to be. So that's where I would go. To answer your question, because I know I sort of dodged it, I think that limiting LMP2 would be the first course of action. It makes the most sense. It's a class that's not in the championship full time. Now, what I will say is I don't see a scenario where the ACO sacrifices having a full grid of cars at Le Mans. Right now, that's 62 cars. I think they're trying to work up to 65 in a few years. So if you take the 20 whatever hypercars you have in the grid and you cannot complete that 62, 65 car lineup with GT3 cars, LMP2, I think, still has its place, and I think will still continue to be there in some capacity. I think they're just going to have to figure out how they want to limit it. And of course, it's still an invite-based system, so I think ultimately what you're going to see is just fewer LMP2 cars on the grid, but not a complete loss of the class altogether.
It could be. This is another class. Like, it could be very interesting to see how the next gen LMP2 regulations affect, LMP2 numbers around the world as well. Like, we're working with an LMP2 car that's been around for a long while now.
8 years.
And there's plenty of spares around. There's that helps to keep some of the costs in check. Introduce a brand new car into the mix, and with you could be faced with introduce a new car into the mix, and maybe introduce a privateer LMDh LMH class in ELMS or ALMS. It could be interesting to see what that does to numbers of LMP2s, and if those numbers drop a bit in terms of sort of their popularity around the world. But I guess our next gen LMP2 regulations are still a few years away.
Yeah, a few years at least. Those
At least,
you talk about things that have been pushed back. That's certainly up there.
Yeah, we're more likely to get hydrogen before we get those updated LMP2 regs.
And look, I mean, this is a really complicated thing to talk about with prototype racing right now, but LMP2s really do a refresh. There's nothing wrong with the quality of racing that we're seeing on track, but I think the product itself by now is certainly lacking. It's essentially become a spec class. I say that loosely because, of course, you can go ahead and run 4 different chassis if you want, but go look at the grid on every single championship by now. Sean Creech was kind of the last frontier we had in IMSA last year. We're not seeing them run that Ligier on the grid this year, so I think that class needs a rethink. They had ideas on how they would balance the cars with a new regulation set, and ultimately sort of scrapped that idea. Right now, there's no real clear direction forward, at least publicly stated clear direction forward for LMP2. And I think that's something that you probably want to get formally down soon. The problem is that you just have so many teams right now across 4 championships, IMSA, ELMS, ALMS, and WEC. Well, no, actually not the WEC. It's just speaking specifically about Le Mans here. Where they don't really want to race a new car because the Orica has been around for a long time. It's extremely reliable. The parts for it are abundant. It's a very sort of, I don't want to say easy, but drama-free class to race in, especially if you're a gentleman driver. I think that's part of the reason why you see more gentleman drivers in LMP2 and IMSA than you do in GTD, because the one thing you get from a class where all the cars are the same is you don't have to worry about balance of performance. You don't need to worry about your car being unexpectedly slower one weekend to the next. There's just a lot less of those variables at play, and I think overall it's probably cheaper at this point as well. So really convincing the teams to switch out to a new formula, I think, is going to be the main challenge for them. I think that's been the hurdle for them for the past couple of seasons now. But for the sake of that product in the future, and somebody else noted here, I think LMP2 will stay around in some capacity due to its popularity in those championships, especially as there needs to be some sort of prototype safety net should the hypercar bubble suddenly burst. Agree with that last part for sure, and that's sort of the purpose LMP2 served in the dwindling days of LMP1. But right now, with the product that we have in LMP2, I think that they can improve on it.
Yeah.
I think if it's going to serve that purpose as sort of a, okay, we lost all these manufacturers in hypercar, we gotta look at LMP2 again now. If you do that with a car that will be well over 10 years old at that point, and all the cars are the same after the era that we have right now, go back to the drawing board. I think we need a rethink there. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping for something on that, maybe around Le Mans this year, but we shall see.
We'll see.
Hyped at the incoming Genesis and future Ford hypercars, what percentage do we think we'll get of a McLaren hypercar effort in or around Le Mans this year? Would be awesome to see Nissan and Mazda as well. So I think McLaren, you can look for an announcement around that Le Mans timeframe. Between now and then, if I had to guess, it would be probably around June. And I would say the actual percentage that you actually get that announcement in that time period, I don't have an exact number. There are people who know way more about this than I do, but I would say about 50%. If I had to throw a number out there. So I would certainly expect that at some point in the next, what are we at, 4 months now. And as for Nissan and Mazda, agree. Would love to see more manufacturers on the grid. They were there in the DPI days. Haven't seen them in the discussion recently, and I don't really expect anything from either of them at this point. But hey, we'll see, I suppose.
I think especially probably not from Nissan, considering they were just purchased by Honda, right?
Well, no, that deal fell through, actually.
Oh, did it? Okay,
yep.
Well, never mind then.
You think AMG and McLaren will make an LMDh car? McLaren, certainly that looks like the way they're leaning. They've already been linked sort of to Dallara. So I would expect that when that formal announcement comes. Notice I said when. And as for AMG, I believe they were also rumored for an LMDh effort as well. It's not as set in stone as the McLaren entry, so things could obviously change there. I know a lot of people would have loved to have seen a hypercar based off the AMG 1, myself included. Would have been really cool to see a proper F1 engine in an endurance racing car. Maybe it wouldn't have been entirely successful, but would have certainly been interesting. Yeah, I would assume that they're probably approaching towards the LMDh route as well.
Yeah.
If they're interested in general.
Yeah, it would be nice to see Mercedes back in the top class. They're going to be good to see that they're going to be back at Le Mans, period, this year. So,
Yep.
Be a logical next step.
Would love to see Lamborghini back in the WEC, but probably only happens if an ambitious ELMS LMP2 team might want to take the step up. It's a good point. We talked about, or you talked about IndyCar teams, or just teams from other motorsports disciplines in general, maybe stepping up to prototype racing, and this is their prime opportunity to do that. You're absolutely right about if an ELMS team wanted to step up as well. The problem is they can't really just do that in the WEC. They would need to have a 2-car factory program. Now, I don't really know how you would define factory program. I suppose if an LMP2 team in the ELMS stepped up with 2 cars in the WEC and had Lamborghini factory drivers, is that going to be allowed? I don't really see why it wouldn't be. But I guess it would have to be considered a factory effort, even if it's not fully factory. Maybe an ELMS team also looks at coming stateside in the IMSA championship as well. We saw that with Proton. Of course,
we've seen it with plenty of teams in recent years too.
Inter Europol's come over recently. I'm just talking specifically on the prototype race, the GTP front. But yeah, if any of those teams wanted to step up, this might be an opportunity to do something like that. But I would say IMSA is certainly more likely than the WEC if I had to put that out there right now.
Yep.
Lost my position in the chat. Lamborghini wants someone to promote their brand and pay for it too in GTP. I just think that is pie in the sky hopes and dreams myself with how unreliable and slow the car is.
Harsh words.
Harsh. Is it true? Right now,
It's hard to argue against it.
I tend to agree with you. It is a big ask right now. When, as I said earlier, if you're a team like JDC, do you switch over from Porsche? That's a tough call for them to make. But as the season goes on, if we get better results out of that car, maybe that's something that becomes a lot more appealing to them. So I think for Lamborghini, that's really what you want is you got to get some podiums. You got to get some contention for top or for race wins in the remaining 4 races that you're going to be running this year. Because if you want to attract those manufacturers, the package that we saw at Daytona is it's going to be a little tough, I think. Nismo are also teasing endurance and rally on social media over the weekend. Maybe they're open to an endurance racing return. I did see that. I didn't read too far into it, but I guess crazier things have happened. But I'm not going to hope for any more than that right now.
Yeah.
Seeing some more skepticism on hydrogen. It's too new for endurance racing or directly a bad idea. Maybe in the 2040s. I don't know how I feel about that right now. It's been something that honestly they've been pushing hydrogen for over a decade now.
Yeah.
And if the manufacturers like Toyota are confident that they can have a car that's up to that level to fight against their GR010 right now, then sure. I'm not one to doubt Toyota. But we'll see, I guess. I'm going to leave it at that, unfortunately, because what we're seeing right now is we've seen a formula that's been delayed multiple times at this point. So you're probably right that it is in infancy stages right now and maybe not quite at the level to compete with GTP and hypercars. But a few years from now, maybe. Toyota certainly seems to be confident about something like that. So,
I mean, the electric car push in racing came on pretty quick as well. So you could see a similar put. If the manufacturers want it, the manufacturers are going to get it at the end of the day.
Fair point. Yep. Well, and there's 2 ways you can go for hydrogen as well. You can go hydrogen fuel cell, which is largely a generator for an electric motor, or you can go hydrogen combustion, which I believe is the route that Toyota has taken.
Yeah.
With their Corolla hydrogen powered race car over in Japan.
Yep.
So a concept like that might be more likely.
Yep.
Did you see that WEC are taking, in quotes, engineers away from F1? Cost cap has them leaving because they aren't making much at F1 and WEC is paying more. I've seen that some F1 engineers are going to the WEC.
There's a really good example of this, and I would recommend anyone that's interested in hearing a little bit more of the comparison between, being an F1 engineer versus being an IMSA engineer is to go and follow Brake. It's like BRRRAKE. He posts all the time on Twitter or X. You may have actually seen he had a tweet very recently that blew up kind of directly about this. As there was a tweet that he had that kind of blew up on this, and it just kind of highlights a lot of some of the issues that F1 is having retaining talent right now with the long schedule that they have and the pay that some of those positions are getting. He was very he's very open about talking about it as well, and quick to point out that last year he was with the Lamborghini SC63 program, And he ran about half of the races that he competed with, compared to when he was with Red Bull in Formula One. And he pointed out that he made more competing with Lamborghini last year. So, it's F1 can carry a lot. It's obviously a very prestigious championship. Looks good for any motorsports engineer on a resume. But at the end of the day, when you want to have some work-life balance, it sounds like sports car racing is maybe a better way to go. And yes, I am talking about brake. Know me. So a very good follow if on social media if you're interested in following along with some more of that.
Yeah, and I will say, to the note of the cost cap, back to the original question, I mean, that's largely one of the factors for a manufacturer like Ferrari joining the grid in the first place, is they had a lot of engineering talent over on the Formula One side. And
driver
to my
talent.
knowledge, weren't going to need as many of those engineers, and a lot of those people got sent over to the 499P program. So not quite the exact way you were going, I don't think. I think you were talking more in terms of actual race engineers instead of, mechanics. But it is, there are certainly a lot of engineers going over from the WEC or from the F1 side over to sports car racing in recent times, both IMSA and WEC. All right, I'm going to end the show with one more question here, and I think we'll have enough to call it a show. Trevor Blue asking, how's the store? Store's going great, Trevor. Thank you for asking. All right, I'll wrap the episode up. We shall be back in a couple of weeks. We got more motorsports coming up soon. We got the WEC 1,812 kilometers of Qatar coming up at the end of the month. And, of course, we've got 12 hours of Sebring in about 4.5 weeks. I'll be on the ground there. Stu, are you going to Sebring this year?
No, I wish I was, but I'm not going to Sebring this year.
I will get videos of the Aston for you.
Good.
As I'm sure many others will. And sound. For now, want to thank everybody who tuned into the show, either live or on a podcasting platform. As I said, we'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about as much sports car racing content as we can, and hope to see you all there. Take care.